Borders were supposed to keep violence out, not give it a language. That was the lie Astrid Windrider understood too late. The same ink that promised peace could be sharpened into a blade if the wrong hands held the pen. Laws sounded clean when elders spoke them over polished tables, but she had learned that law could also smell like fear, hot metal, and old smoke, could bite into skin, could turn a breathing woman into a line item beneath a wax seal. Hope had not vanished from her all at once. It had thinned by degrees, thread by thread, until the morning her cousin called her by her full name in a crowded hall and priced her like grain. They marched her into the treaty chamber at noon, when the sun struck the skylights hard enough to expose every face. Iron cuffs circled her wrists, linked by a short chain that forced her elbows close. The metal had rubbed her skin raw during the ride from Windrider Hold, and each step made the links rasp against each other with a small, humiliating sound. She kept her back straight anyway. The hall had been built for ceremony. Black stone floor scrubbed to a dull sheen, banners from both packs hanging in parallel rows, long tables set with untouched bread and salt as if this were a wedding feast rather than a sale. Her uncle stood beneath the Silvermane crest without meeting her gaze. Two of her aunts watched openly, their mouths pressed thin with the relief of people who had survived by surrendering someone else. Owen Silvermane stood at the center dais in a deep gray cloak edged with white wolf fur. He had always been handsome in the way polished steel was handsome, sharp and reflective and cold. He raised a parchment and smiled at the assembly. "By consent of the Western Council," he said, voice carrying cleanly to the high beams, "we ratify the Border Grain Accord with the Eastern Crown, shared river rights, winter passage, non-aggression through the thaw." Murmurs of approval moved through the benches. Astrid felt the chain pull as a guard repositioned behind her shoulder. Owen lifted a second sheet. "And one necessary clause of living pledge to ensure good faith in years of scarcity. Astrid Windrider, blood heir through the maternal line, will transfer to Eastern custody for the duration of the pact." For a breath, the hall went very still. Then someone near the rear asked, "Transfer as what, exactly?" Owen did not look at Astrid. "As collateral personhood under treaty authority, protected asset status. No harm permitted unless she violates host law." Protected asset. The words struck harder than a slap because they had been chosen for comfort. She felt heat rise behind her eyes and crushed it down. Crying in front of them would become part of the paperwork. Her uncle finally spoke, voice rough. "This prevents famine in 9 valleys. We do what we must." Astrid turned her head enough to find him. "You said we were family." His gaze flickered, then dropped to the table. "We are preserving the pack." Owen gestured toward the witness stand. "Bring her thumb to the page." The guard reached for her wrist. She jerked back, chain clanging. "Do not touch me." "Then step forward on your own," Owen said. "Do not make this uglier than it is." A bitter laugh almost escaped her. Uglier. As if there were degrees left. She moved because resistance here would only feed his performance. The dais smelled of candle wax and ink. She saw her name written in formal script halfway down the parchment, followed by the phrase "transferable property" in a hand that was not the scribe's original line. Inserted. Deliberate. Fresh. She heard herself think, with startling calm, "If I scream, they will call it hysteria. If I fight, they will call it proof. If I kneel, they will call it consent. There is no right move inside a rigged circle. There is only survival. One breath, then the next." Owen pressed the ink pad toward her cuffed hands. "Mark." She stared at him. "You altered the clause. The council approved the final language. You forged the vote." His smile thinned. "Careful." The elder scribe cleared his throat and looked anywhere but at her. Silence answered her accusation. Silence was answer enough. Astrid pressed her thumb to the parchment because the guard tightened his grip on the back of her neck, because she wanted to live long enough to remember every face in this room, because defiance deferred was not defiance surrendered. The black print bloomed beneath her name. Owen rolled the document closed and tied it with red thread. The treaty stands. A few people clapped. The sound scraped down her spine. By dusk they had her on the eastern road under 6 escorts, wrists still bound, cloak replaced with a coarse travel wrap that smelled of old wool and damp horse. The mountain path climbed through fir and shale, narrow enough that the carts passed single file. Wind funneled down the ravine with a knife edge, needling through her sleeves. She stumbled once on loose stone, and a guard yanked her upright by the chain so hard her shoulder burned. They camped in a clearing just short of the pass marker, where 2 carved standing stones marked the old territorial line. One of the younger escorts built a fire while the others drank from a skin and argued in low voices they assumed she could not hear. If Dark Hollow refuses delivery, she goes to the salt pits, one said. Not my problem where she ends. Careful, she is air blood. Not for long. Astrid sat with her back against a supply crate, ankles tied now as well, the ropes cutting above her boots. Smoke stung her eyes. Hunger curled through her belly in slow, hollow waves. She had been given broth at noon and nothing since. A broad-shouldered enforcer named Pell crouched in front of her and hooked a finger under her chin. You understand what happens if you cause trouble tomorrow? She turned her face away. Take your hand off me. He caught her jaw harder. Answer. She drove her forehead forward into the bridge of his nose. He cursed and reeled back, palms flying to his face. 2 others surged up, and one struck her across the mouth with the back of his hand. Pain flashed bright, then dulled to a copper taste. Pell straightened, eyes watering with rage. Chain her to the axle. As they hauled her toward the wagon, panic rose sharp and clean, stripping away exhaustion. Not tomorrow. Not another haul, another table, another man naming terms over her body. The rope around her ankles had loosened slightly where the knot rubbed on splintered wood. She twisted her foot, testing. A fraction of give. Night deepened. The fire dropped to coals. One guard took first watch while the rest settled under cloaks. Astrid kept still, breath measured, working the rope against a bent iron nail on the wagon frame, millimeter by millimeter until fibers began to fray. Her wrists ached with each motion. Her fingers went numb in the cold. She did not stop. Run now, she told herself, not later. Later is how cages close. A sudden crack echoed from the slope above as a small slide of stones rattled into camp. The watchman turned, swore, and took 3 steps toward the noise. Astrid ripped the last strand of rope free, rolled under the wagon, and came up on the far side in darkness. Her ankle chain snagged once on a root. She kicked, felt skin tear, kept moving. Hey, she is loose! Shouts exploded behind her. She plunged into the trees, branches whipping her face, pine needles slick underfoot. The moon was a thin white hook between clouds, barely enough to read the ground. She ran downhill first, then cut left toward the pass markers she had seen at dusk, lungs burning, chain clattering with every stride like a bell announcing her position. A horn sounded once, then again. She vaulted a fallen trunk, landed badly, and nearly went to her knees. Pain lanced up her calf where the chain had carved it open. She tasted blood where she had bitten her tongue and forced air into her chest in ragged pulls. Behind her, boots crashed through brush. Closer. The forest opened without warning onto a narrow shelf of rock above the boundary gully. Wind slammed into her, carrying snow scent from higher peaks, and, beneath it, a different note she did not recognize, yet felt all through her bones. Cedar, rain, old stone warmed by sun. Torches flared below. Not western orange pitchlight, eastern blue-white flame, steady even in gusts. Stop where you are, a voice called from the dark ahead, deep and controlled. Name yourself. She skidded at the edge of the shelf and lifted her bound hands in front of her chest, chain hanging between them. Astrid Windrider, she shouted, voice breaking. Treaty transfer. I request sanctuary. The Western escorts burst from the trees behind her. Pell pointed, breathless. She is property under seal. Return her. Shapes moved out of the night across the gully, armored figures in dark leathers, wolves pacing silent at their flanks. Their captain did not lower his spear. Step back, he told Pell. You have crossed eastern markers armed and without herald call. She is ours by law. Astrid swayed on her feet. Cold and adrenaline made the world narrow to torchlight and stone, and the taste of iron at the back of her throat. She expected argument, maybe a struggle, maybe a knife slip between her ribs while men debated jurisdiction over her body. Instead, hooves sounded on the upper path. Every eastern sentry straightened. A mounted figure in a black cloak rode down through the pines and dismounted in one fluid motion, tall, broad, carrying command the way some men carried weapons. His face was carved in hard lines made harder by moonlight, and when he looked at the Western escorts, they took an involuntary half-step back. Victor Darkhollow, Alpha King of the East, took the sealed treaty tube from Pell without asking permission. He broke the wax, unrolled the pages, and read once, expression unreadable. Then he read again, slower, thumb pausing on the inserted clause. Astrid stood with the chain hanging from her wrists, shaking so hard she could hear the links tapping against each other. She waited for judgment. Victor rolled the parchment closed, handed it to his captain, and spoke in a voice that cut clean through wind and fear alike. No one touches what crosses my threshold under my protection. The words struck the gathered men harder than a drawn blade. Pell's mouth opened, closed, opened again, as if he expected another line that would soften the first. None came. Victor remained where he stood, one gloved hand resting lightly on the rolled treaty, the other at his side. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You crossed into my territory after Horncall without leave. You pursued a declared petitioner under armed escort. You will return to your side of the markers tonight and report that the transfer arrived and lives under Eastern protection pending tribunal review. She escaped lawful custody, Pell snapped, wiping old blood from his nose with the back of his hand. She struck an enforcer. She is collateral under Section 9. Then Section 9 will be tested under Moon Oath, Victor said, not in a ravine with 6 men and a rope. One of the Western guards muttered that this was theft in a king's cloak. The captain beside Victor bared his teeth in a brief, humorless smile, and 3 Eastern wolves stepped forward in eerie synchronicity, huge shadows with pale breath pluming in the wind. The muttering stopped. Astrid stood very still while the men argued over the legal shape of her body. Her knees shook from the run, from hunger, from the fading edge of terror that left her hollowed out and raw. Wind cut through her damp shirt. Her split lip throbbed with each heartbeat. She could feel blood drying in a line down her ankle where the chain had bitten through skin. Victor turned to her then, and for the first time she understood why people lowered their gaze around him. It was not brute menace. It was attention, absolute and unsparing, the kind that measured truth and cowardice in a single look. "Did you request sanctuary of your own will?" he asked. The question was simple. No one in the treaty hall had asked what she wanted once all day. "Yes," she said. Her voice came out rough but steady. "By my own will." He nodded once. "Cut the chain." Pell lunged forward half a step. "You cannot just take her." Victor's gaze shifted back to him, cool as mountain water in winter. "Watch me enforce my border." The Eastern captain moved before Astrid could brace herself, crouching in front of her with careful hands and a short bolt cutter that bit through the linking chain at her wrists in 2 hard snaps. Iron fell against stone. The sound rang through her chest. The cuff circles remained, but the line that had yanked her from neck to shoulder all day lay severed at her boots. She almost wept from the weight that vanished. No one touched her without warning after that. An older sentry with silver threaded through his braid offered a wool cloak, holding it out and waiting for her nod before draping it over her shoulders. Someone brought a water skin. She drank too fast, coughed, tried again. Her hands shook so badly the cap slipped twice. Victor watched everything with that same still focus. He glanced once at her mouth, her ankle, the rope burns on her wrists, and something tightened in his expression for a heartbeat before it settled back into stone. "Record her condition," he said to his captain. "Every mark. Signed by 2 witnesses. Send copy at dawn with the return escort." Pell gave a bitter laugh. "You think paperwork changes ownership?" Victor stepped closer, not enough to threaten, enough to make distance an act of mercy. "I think records survive liars." The Western group was disarmed at the line, their blades wrapped in cloth and returned only when they were marched back to the old markers under guard. Pell threw Astrid one last look, hatred and calculation braided together. She met it without flinching, though her stomach clenched so hard she felt sick. When they disappeared into the trees, the ravine seemed to exhale. The Eastern captain introduced himself as Rewrote and asked if she could walk. She tried, made 3 steps, and her injured leg threatened to fold beneath her. Victor did not reach for her. He signaled for a mule instead, then waited while she climbed into the saddle with awkward pride and clenched teeth. Respect, she realized with a start, could look like restraint. The path to Dark Hollow Fortress climbed in switchbacks cut into the mountain's shoulder. Blue-white braziers marked the route at intervals, their flames oddly clean in the wind. Timber watchtowers rose above narrow ledges where sentries stood with long spears and horn bows. Wolves paced the perimeter lines in pairs, silent, disciplined, eyes reflecting moonlight like polished coin. By the time they passed the inner gate, night had deepened to a hard, crystalline cold. The fortress was less a castle than a city folded into stone. Terraced courtyards, steep roofs loaded with old snow, carved lintels bearing runes she could not read. She smelled cedar smoke, forge heat, and fresh bread somewhere far below. The scent of food made hunger twist sharply through her. People looked at her as she passed. Not many spoke. A few had open suspicion, a few curiosity. 1 or 2, the wary pity reserved for the wounded and the dangerous. No one laughed. No one reached for her. It unsettled her more than mockery would have. She had spent so long braced for contempt that simple order felt like a trick. "I am in his den now," she thought, and the thought came in a rushing, present tense current she could not shut off. "I am warm for the first time today, and still I am shaking. I keep expecting the next hand at my neck, the next command, the next paper with my name under someone else's signature. If I sleep, I might wake in another cage. If I trust this silence, it might turn its teeth on me by dawn." But he asked me what I wanted in front of witnesses. He cut the chain. He documented every bruise like evidence, not shame. I do not know this man. I do not know this pack. I only know that survival is not the same as surrender. And tonight I am still breathing where Owen expected me broke in. That has to mean something, even if I cannot name it yet. Rurik led her to a small chamber tucked into an inner corridor rather than a cell block, with a narrow bed, wash basin, and a shuttered window overlooking the lower yard. A healer came, cleaned her ankle, and wrapped it with firm, competent hands. Another attendant set a tray by the hearth. Broth, dark bread, salted butter, apple slices. Astrid waited for the price of the meal. None was named. The door closed. A bar slid home on the outside. She stared at it for a long time, pulse kicking at her throat. The bar stayed in place through the rest of the night. She dozed in jagged fragments, waking at every bootstep in the corridor and each distant horn note from the wall towers. Gray dawn seeped through the shutters. The healer returned to rebind her ankle while a court scribe catalogued each bruise Victor had ordered recorded, then pressed wax to the page beneath 2 witness marks. Voices carried up through the day from the lower yards. Western envoys demanding immediate hearing under Moon Tribunal custom, stewards running messages, stoneworkers hauling braziers toward the central ring. Darkness climbed the terraces. When the moonrise bell sounded, Rurik came himself with a formal escort. They brought her there under guard at moonrise, not as a prisoner dragged in chains, but as a contested claimant under formal right. The distinction mattered to everyone except her exhausted body. She had slept in fragments, waking at each shift change, each distant horn, each dream of ink-stained fingers pressing her thumb to parchment. The tribunal court lay open to the sky, ringed by standing stones older than either pack's current lineages. Torches burned in iron brackets, and the moon poured silver across the central dais where oathwork was done. The stone underfoot had been washed, but not perfectly. Dark streaks remained in the shallow channels carved for blood pledge rites, old and new mingled. Witness benches climbed in semicircles. Western envoys stood on one side in pale cloaks. Eastern officers stood opposite in dark leathers edged with fur. Between them stretched a corridor of silence. Victor waited at the base of the dais steps, bareheaded, shoulders squared, the treaty case in his hand. The court herald read charges and claims in a voice that carried to every seat. Transfer validity, collateral authority, boundary enforcement, petitioner rights. Astrid heard the words as if through thick wool. She focused on each breath, each step, the steady burn in her healing ankle. Halfway up the worn stone stairs, her boot slid. There was a thin smear of fresh oath blood near the third riser where a witness had cut palm to seal testimony. She felt leather lose traction, felt her center tip sideways toward the edge. A gasp lifted from the benches. Victor moved. He caught her bare wrist where her sleeve had fallen back, fingers closing just above the cuff scar, strong and controlled. Contact should have been simple physics. It was not. Heat streaked up her arm in a fierce line, then split through her chest and spine like storm fire threading frozen ground. The air seemed to sharpen, every scent slamming into sudden clarity. Cedar on his skin, snowmelt on stone, iron, smoke, and beneath it all a wild, ancient note that hit her like recognition older than memory. Her lungs forgot how to work for one suspended beat. Victor's reaction was immediate and far less contained than his discipline allowed in public. His eyes widened once, unmistakably. Then amber flooded his irises as his pupils narrowed to predator slits. The tendons along his jaw stood out. A low sound, almost a growl and almost a stunned breath, roughened in his throat before he mastered it. Around them, a murmur rippled through both delegations. Astrid could not look away. Terror and pull collided so violently that her knees nearly gave again. Every lesson survival had taught her screamed that bonds could become chains, that belonging could be weaponized, that wanting safety from a powerful man was how women disappeared in polite language. Yet relief cracked through the panic all the same, sharp and unwelcome and real. He looked at her like she was a person at the center of this storm, not cargo caught in it. His thumb shifted a fraction against her pulse, not possessive, anchoring. She felt the answering thrum in him as clearly as her own heartbeat, 2 rhythms stumbling toward sync and then locking for a breath before both surged harder. He released her at once, stepping back enough to restore the formal distance the court expected. But the court had seen. Wolves in the outer ranks went rigid, nostrils flaring. Rurik's head snapped toward Victor with startled comprehension. On the western side, Pell muttered a curse under his breath and one envoy blanched. Victor spoke without looking at anyone else. Can you stand? Yes. The word barely held. She straightened, ignoring the tremor in her hand. His gaze held hers one last suspended second, something ancient looking out through the controlled mask of a king. Then he turned toward the herald. Proceed, he said. The tribunal resumed, but nothing in the ring was neutral anymore. The moon burned overhead. The blood channels gleamed dark at their feet, and Astrid stood with her wrist still hot where he had touched her, knowing with clean, frightening certainty that whatever name this bond demanded, it would not let either of them pretend ignorance again. The herald called the next witness, and Astrid forced her hand to unclench at her side, while legal language rolled across the stone ring in measured waves. Western envoys argued clause precedents and collateral rights. Eastern advocates answered with border custom and petitioner law. No one spoke the word mate, yet it moved under every sentence like a submerged current, tugging at posture and breath and silence. Victor did not look at her again during testimony. That discipline, more than any public declaration, told her how dangerous this had become. By the time the moon angled west and frost silvered the tribunal steps, the judges deferred final ruling until dawn review of the copied treaty text and witness seals. Rewrote escorted her back through inner corridors lit by low braziers, each flame throwing copper over carved stone wolves and old battle runes. Her chamber door stood open. The outer bar was gone. She stopped short. Who removed it? King's order, Rewrote said. New hardware by midnight. New hardware? Inside lock only. His voice softened, almost awkward. You will see. He left her there with a brief nod and 2 guards posted farther down the corridor than before, near the stairwell landing, not at her threshold. Astrid stepped in slowly, as if the room might shift shape once the door closed. A smith had set a heavy iron lock plate on the inner frame, bright around fresh rivets, key resting on the washstand beside folded bandages. The message was plain enough to hurt. She washed blood and tribunal dust from her hands, ate half a heel of bread she had no appetite for, and lay down fully clothed with the key in her fist. Sleep arrived like ambush. She was back in the treaty hall with ink on her thumb that would not wash off, then in the ravine with chain at her throat, then on the tribunal stairs with Victor's hand on her wrist and fire racing under skin while every witness watched. In the dream, the courtroom benches bent inward like jaws. Owen stood at the center, smiling, holding a map where her name had replaced every borderline. She woke hard, bolting upright, breath tearing out of her, the room tilted and hostile and too small. Moonlight through the shutter bars striped the floor. Her hands were shaking so violently she dropped the key. It skittered beneath the bed. No. No. Breathe. Move. Her chest would not listen. Panic climbed anyway, fast and merciless. A quiet sound came from the corridor side of the door, not a knock, a shift of weight against stone. Then Victor's voice, low through the wood, careful about distance. Astrid, it is me. She swallowed twice before sound came. How long have you been there? Since the second watch bell. The answer stunned her into stillness. Second watch had passed nearly an hour ago. Why? He took a moment as if selecting words mattered as much as keeping his body on the other side of the threshold. Because panic has a sound. I heard it when I crossed this wing. She pressed her palms to her knees and forced air in and out through her nose, counting with the rhythm of his voice when he spoke again. You are locked from inside only. No one has authority to enter without your leave, including me. The guards are posted at the stair, not your door. If you need the corridor clear, I will clear it. The floor felt steadier under her bare feet. She crossed to the door but did not open it, resting her forehead against cool wood. I am awake. I am here. This is stone, not the treaty hall. This is my hand, not a guard's grip. The key is under the bed because I dropped it, not because someone took it. He is outside, and he stayed outside. He heard me and did not force the lock, did not claim right by bond or title, did not turn concern into command. My body keeps waiting for the trick, the price, the moment kindness turns and shows its teeth. I keep bracing for ownership dressed as protection, but the bar is gone, the lock is mine. His voice is asking nothing except that I breathe. I do not know what to do with the safety I can choose. I do not know how to trust a man powerful enough to crush me, who keeps stepping back instead. I only know the shaking is slowing while he speaks, and that frightens me almost as much as the fear did. You can leave, she said, testing him as much as herself. I am fine now. Then I will sit at the far wall until dawn and be quiet. A rough laugh escaped her despite the rawness in her throat. That is not leaving. No, he agreed, and she heard the faint scrape of him settling onto stone several feet away. It is not. She slid down the door and sat on her side of it, knees drawn up, listening to the fortress breathe around them. Wind touched the outer towers. Somewhere below, a gate chain rattled. Once, distant, a wolf called and another answered from the upper ridge. He did not speak again unless her breath stuttered, and then only counted softly from 1 to 5 until her lungs found rhythm. When gray light edged the shutter seams, Boots approached and halted. Rurik's voice came down the corridor. My king, the westward courier returned. The witness copy was delivered and signed at the marker. Outcome? Victor asked. Silvermane Council acknowledged receipt. No contest filed yet. Noted. The footsteps retreated. Astrid marked the exchange without moving. Records sent. Records received. Nothing vanished into rumor. After a long pause, Victor spoke through the wood. May I enter? She stood, retrieved the key from beneath the bed, and unlocked the door herself. He filled the frame in a dark training tunic and travel leathers, hair damp as if he had washed at the barracks pumps, jaw shadowed with a sleepless night. His gaze flicked once over her face, checking, then dropped to his hand. He held out her knife, hilt first, cleaned and newly wrapped at the grip where old leather had split. If you cannot choose the room, choose the blade, he said. The words landed between them with the weight of an oath. Her fingers closed around the hilt before she had decided to accept it. The familiarity of balance against her palm was almost painful. She stepped back, then forward again, anger and gratitude tangling into something sharp. A bond did not erase history. A kind act did not erase cages. She needed proof she could still set terms. In one motion, she lifted the blade and set the edge against the side of his throat. Rurik, somewhere down the corridor, made a startled sound and took one step that stopped at Victor's raised hand. Victor did not flinch. His pulse moved steady beneath steel. Is this a test? He asked quietly. Or a warning? Both. Good. She pressed a fraction harder, enough to whiten the skin where the blade kissed. You could stop me. Yes. You could order me restrained. Yes. Why are you not? His eyes held hers, amber-banked but watchful. Because control taken by force is easy. Trust given is rare. He breathed once, slow. And because I have lived long enough to know the difference between a woman defending her boundaries and an enemy striking to kill. Something in her chest eased and ached at once. She lowered the knife. He nodded once as if she had done exactly what he hoped she would do, then turned to leave. At the threshold, he paused. Eat before training. Rurik will show you the yard. I will be there. Training? You asked the tribunal to treat you as claimant, not cargo. Claimants are expected to stand their ground. He left without waiting for agreement. By the third day after the tribunal hearing, word of the bond had reached every stairwell, kitchen hearth, and armory rack in Dark Hollow, stripped of nuance and sharpened by gossip. Astrid learned to feel the shift when she entered a room: curiosity, skepticism, resentment, calculation. She arrived at the lower weapons court at first light with her ankle bound, hair braided tight, and the returned knife at her belt beside a wooden practice blade Rurik had issued. The training yard sat in a sunk stone rectangle open to the sky, ringed with weapon racks and scarred posts. Frost smoked off the sand as the sun climbed. Officers drilled in paired rotations, boots thudding, staffs cracking, breath loud in the cold. Victor stood near the center with arms folded, correcting footwork with spare gestures. He glanced at Astrid once, brief acknowledgement, then signaled her toward the line. A broad enforcer named Hadron snorted when she took position opposite him. "We drilling treaty spoil now?" Two others laughed. Not loud. Enough. Astrid rolled her shoulders and set her stance, refusing the bait. "Move or yield." Hadron tapped his practice spear against her boot. Careful. Would not want to damage inventory. The yard stilled in pockets, attention tilting toward them. Victor's voice cut through the air. "Stop." One word. Absolute silence fell so fast the fading scrape of a distant sparring pair sounded like thunder. He walked into the center lane and looked from face to face, not rushing, making each officer hold his gaze. "You will kneel." Hadron blinked. "My king, this is yard talk. Kneel." They went down one by one, leather creaking, weapons laid flat on the sand. Hadron hesitated longest, then dropped with visible reluctance. Victor turned to Astrid. "Name them." She understood a heartbeat later, not punishment hidden in private. Record made in witnesses. She pointed. Hadron. Tovik. Eslin. Mar. "Speak your oath," Victor said to the kneeling men. "By name." Hadron's jaw flexed. "I, Hadron of Dark Hollow Guard, swear fealty to Astrid Windrider's safety while she stands under Eastern protection and by her own claim." Each man repeated the pledge in turn, voice by voice, until the words formed a chain stronger than iron because everyone in the yard had heard them. When it came to the last enforcer, a heavy-set veteran called Bren, he stayed standing, spear still in hand. "This is madness," Bren said. "She is Western blood. A legal dispute wrapped in perfume from the moon. We bend knee to a rumor and call it law?" Victor's expression did not change. "Kneel." Bren spat into the sand and reached toward Astrid's arm as if to shove her behind him, dismissing her with the same gesture men used for servants and children. Victor moved faster than sight could map cleanly. One blink, and he was there, hand clamped at Bren's windpipe, driving him backward against a post hard enough to rattle the rack of shields. The shift came in flashes, nails lengthening into hooked claws, canines bared. Amber bled bright into his irises until something feral looked out through his face. A raw growl rolled through the yard and every wolf on the parapet answered in tense, uncertain chorus. Bren dropped the spear and grabbed at Victor's wrist, boots scrabbling for purchase. No one moved. No one dared. Astrid felt the old fear spike, not of Victor turning on her, but of violence deciding its own direction once released. She stepped forward, voice carrying sharper than she expected. "Stand down." The command hit the space between them like struck metal. Victor froze. For one stretched second, predator and king warred in his posture, claws still at Bren's throat, breath harsh. Then he released him and stepped back. The shift receded with visible effort, shoulders rigid, fingers flexing once before his hand opened empty at his side. Bren slid to his knees coughing, stunned less by pain than by the fact he was alive. Victor did not look at him. He looked at Astrid. "Your call stands." She nodded, pulse hammering. "He swears or he leaves the guard." Bren stayed on both knees and pressed his fist to his chest. Voice ragged, eyes lowered, he gave the oath by name. Training resumed in tight, sober lines. No one used the phrase treaty spoil again. Hadrian corrected her grip without mockery. Tovik reset her stance when the ankle wrap pulled her weight off center. Even the laughter that surfaced once near the water barrel was ordinary barracks humor, the kind that did not demand someone else bleed for it. As the sun cleared the east wall, Victor approached with 2 wooden blades and held one out. Again, he said. She took it. They circled on frost-damp sand while the yard moved around them, and for the first time since the treaty hall, Astrid let her guard lower by a single deliberate degree. Not because she was dazzled by power, not because bond fever clouded judgment, but because she had watched him choose restraint twice when domination would have been easier, and because, when she had spoken, he had listened. The yard gates groaned open, and a horn from the upper rampart cut across the sparring lanes with 3 clipped blasts reserved for diplomatic entry. Every officer turned toward the sound. Victor lowered his practice blade and looked to Rurik. The captain was already moving, one hand on the hilt at his back. A runner reached them breathless, frost steaming off his shoulders. Westward delegation at the outer court. Peace banners. Owen Silvermane requests immediate audience under treaty privilege. Hadrian swore under his breath. Tovik muttered. He came himself. Astrid felt the cold settle under her skin in a way no cloak could block. Owen never crossed a border unless he had measured every exit first. Victor's expression gave nothing away, but his voice dropped into command cadence. Yard dismissed to second rotation. Officer cadre with me. Astrid, you attend as named claimant. Rurik, full witness record. No one enters unsearched, including scribes. By midday, the fortress Great Hall had filled with controlled tension and polished hostility. Blue-white braziers burned along the walls beneath carved wolf standards. Western delegates stood in pale cloaks edged with silver thread, hands folded with ceremonial calm. Eastern officers formed a dark line opposite, still as drawn bows. At the center, Owen Silvermane looked as immaculate as ever, his smile precise enough to pass for courtesy, until one looked at his eyes. He bowed just enough to honor rank without conceding ground. King Victor, your hospitality remains legendary. State your petition, Victor said. Owen lifted a lacquered case and withdrew 3 scrolls. I invoke the Blood Continuance Statute Pre-Unification Codex, Section 4. Female heirs transferred under collateral language remain reclaimable to birth pack custody if unmarked by lawful mate right. He let the words hang, then turned his head toward Astrid as if she were a witness exhibit. Astrid Windrider is unmarked. Therefore, she returns with me for proper adjudication in Western Court. A low murmur moved through both sides. Rurik signaled a court clerk, and copies of the statute were brought from the fortress archive chest. Victor did not touch Owen's documents yet. Your codex citation predates River Accords by 2 centuries, Victor said. Superseded in most jurisdictions. Most, Owen repeated, pleased. Not all. The mountain passes retained dual inheritance exceptions after the famine years. You know this. I know this. The law remains dormant until invoked by blood claimant. He spread his hand toward Astrid. And she is blood claimant, whether she enjoys the title or not. Astrid kept her gaze on him and said nothing. Silence had teeth when used correctly. Owen produced a second bundle bound in blue cord. I also submit witness seals from Western Council confirming her maternal line obligations and family consent for temporary return. Rurik accepted the bundle with tongs from the evidence tray and passed it to the hall examiner. Wax, signatures, registry marks. All proper at first glance. Too proper. Then Owen drew out a final packet. Thinner, creased at the edges, and his voice softened into practiced concern. Personal correspondence, Astrid, from your mother. The hall seemed to narrow around her. She had not heard her mother's name spoken aloud in this place. He held up the top page without offering it yet. She asks that you comply peacefully. She writes that stubbornness has already cost your kin too much. She asks you to come home and stop provoking bloodshed. Victor's jaw tightened. You will hand all private letters to her directly. Now. Of course. Owen stepped forward one pace, arm extended, then stopped just beyond Astrid's reach. Take them. She did not move. Take them, he repeated, quiet enough that only the first rows heard. Or shall I read them for the room? The threat was elegant and filthy. Victor took one step down from the dais, and 3 eastern wolves at the side doors lifted their heads in unison. Owen's smile thinned but held. Astrid walked forward herself, took the letters from his hand, and felt the paper tremble once between them. The seal on the top page carried her mother's signet. The scent of the wax was wrong. Resin heavy, not the beeswax her mother always used. She tucked that detail away like a blade. Owen retreated to his mark and addressed the court again. I came under peace banners to prevent misunderstanding. If the East refuses lawful return of unmarked collateral, your king stands in sovereign breach. Breach invites regency measures. Neither of us wants war in winter. There it was. Not a plea, a setup. Victor's voice went colder. Regency by whom? Owen inclined his head as if discussing whether. By the Western Acting Council naturally, until stability is restored. Rurik laughed once without humor. You dissolved your acting council last month. Owen spread his hands. Then perhaps I must rebuild it. By late afternoon, after document exchange and formal objections, the hall emptied in rigid clusters. Under moon law, the challenge would proceed at night in the boundary court outside the inner gate. Astrid stood alone in a side passage with the letters in her hand, staring at her mother's slanted script until the words blurred. Victor approached and stopped several feet away. He did not ask for the pages. Do you want me to stay? Do you want the political answer or the true one? The true one. Yes, she said. And no. Both. He nodded once, accepting complexity without trying to solve it for her. She broke the seal and read. Her mother's hand, unmistakable. Every line pressed hard enough to score the page. Astrid, do not force this. Owen says he can spare the valley levies if you return quietly. He says the East will use you and discard you once marked. Please come back before men die for your pride. I could not stop the first treaty. I can still stop the next one. Obey and live. No affection line, no endearment. Just fear folded into obedience. I am standing in a stone corridor that smells like cedar smoke and snowmelt, and my hands are steady while my chest is not. I read her words and I hear the old lesson, the one sewn into every meal and every silence. Bend early, bleed less. Keep your head down and call survival a victory. I used to think love meant rescue, that if I was useful enough, someone would finally choose me first. Now I am learning another shape of love, and it terrifies me because it asks me to choose myself where everyone can see. If I go back, I vanish into their language again. If I stay, men may die, and they will write my name beside the cost. I want him. I fear him. I trust him in pieces. I do not trust the world around us at all. When she lowered the page, Victor was watching her face, not the letter. Owen is not here for law, she said. I know. He wants the passes. And a war excuse when I refuse. She folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the packet. He also wants me to walk into the cage myself so he can call it consent. Victor's gaze sharpened. Then we deny him that language. A bell rang from the south tower, signaling first moonrise watch. In the corridor beyond, stewards hurried with tribunal benches and oath bowls. One paused to whisper to Rurik as he passed. The captain pivoted and came straight toward them. King, we flagged one of the Western witness seals, he said quietly. Registry number belongs to a dead elder. buried 9 years. Astrid looked up. Can you prove it publicly tonight? Not cleanly, Rurik said. Not unless we compel living oath comparison under boundary right. Victor's focus shifted to Astrid, and she saw the calculation she had expected from the first night in the ravine. Risk, optics, force, survival. But beneath it was that same restraint, waiting for her call. Moon court in 1 hour, he said. We can stall on procedural review and push to dawn. Owen would use dawn to spread rumor, she thought. By second week of October, rumor traveled faster than mounted couriers across both packs, because everyone wanted a war story they could survive. Delay fed him. No stall, she said. If he wants moonlight, give him moonlight. The boundary court blazed with torchlight by full dark. Snow dusted the upper stones, melting where braziers burned. Witness rows filled shoulder to shoulder, eastern and western cloaks divided by a center lane of bare rock. At the far edge stood the old boundary dais, engraved with oath channels and ringed with standing stones black as wet bone. Astrid took her place beside Victor, letters hidden inside her belt wrap. Owen stood across from them, serene, flanked by legal attendants and one narrow man in a gray scribe mantle she had not seen before. The man kept his hood low despite the fire heat. The herald began recitation: claims, counterclaims, jurisdiction, bloodline. Oath knife passed to each principal for palm touch. Owen complied with flawless ceremony. Victor did the same. Astrid watched the gray-mantled scribe instead of the herald text because his left hand never stopped moving under the writing board, adjusting something near his wrist. The challenge reached argument phase. Owen lifted his voice so the back rows could hear. If the king insists on holding Western blood against valid reclaim statute, then he admits sovereign theft. If he admits theft, all treaty protections fail. If protections fail, border levies activate under Regency authority. I did not bring war. I brought remedy. Victor answered with controlled contempt. You brought forged seals and family coercion and call it remedy. Owen smiled. Prove forgery. The gray-mantled scribe stepped forward at that exact beat, as if to deliver a fresh tablet to the herald. Too fast. Too close. Astrid saw a glint under his sleeve. Not ink metal, but thin silver. Needle bright. Victor, she snapped. She moved at the same moment, slamming her shoulder into Victor's chest. The scribe's arm whipped up. The silver spike sliced across Victor's side instead of striking his neck, tearing cloth and skin in one short line before Rurik hit the attacker from behind. The writing board shattered on stone. A hidden spring blade skittered free, coated in dull blue paste. The court exploded into motion. Wolves lunged at their handlers. Western delegates shouted protests over Eastern battle calls. Owen stepped back into his guard ring with a look of outraged innocence that was almost art. Assassination in your own court, he shouted above the uproar. By your own security failure. Victor stayed on his feet, one hand clamped over the cut, blood darkening his tunic in a narrow band. Not deep. Then his knees dipped once, barely. Rurik kicked the fallen blade away and dragged the attacker upright. The man bit down hard. Foam touched his lips. Poison capsule, Astrid realized, and felt ice crawl up her spine. Keep him alive, she yelled. Do not let him die. Too late. The man convulsed and went slack in Rurik's grip. Owen lifted both hands, voice ringing with rehearsed grief. This hearing is compromised. By emergency statute, the unmarked claimant transfers to neutral Western custody until leadership stability is restored. No, Astrid said, but the word vanished under the roar. Victor turned toward her, eyes still clear but unfocused at the edges. Blade, he said through his teeth. Coated. He swayed. She caught his arm, feeling heat spike under his skin where the cut spread a faint blue shadow along the torn cloth. Around them, steel hissed from sheaths. The boundary stones seemed to lean inward, listening. If Victor fell before judgment, Owen would seize the language of crisis and lock the court under regency claim before dawn. Astrid looked from the dead assassin to Owen's immaculate gloves to the standing stones waiting in moonlight, and understood with brutal clarity that law would either become her weapon now or her cage forever. She stepped away from Victor before her fear could chain her to him. "Hear me," she shouted, and the force in her voice cut through steel noise and shouted orders. "I invoke the right of boundaries by blood right, maternal windrider line, witnessed under full moon. No regency motion stands until right judgment is rendered." Silence did not fall at once. It slammed down in pieces, row by row, as the words landed and their meaning spread. Even Western advocates who hated her knew the old law. A blood heir could force truth challenge at the stones if sovereignty itself was being twisted. Refusal meant public admission of bad faith. Owen's expression flickered for the first time. "You do not have authority to trigger that right without council assent." Astrid did not look at him. "Herald, recite clause." The herald hesitated, eyes darting to Victor, then to the carved ring beneath his feet. Victor had gone very still, hand pressed to his side, breath measured like someone holding a door shut against rising floodwater. He lifted his chin once. The herald swallowed. "Pre-treaty Codex, Boundary Rights, Section 12. Any blood heir of signatory houses may compel open oath trial in cases of disputed personhood, forged claim, or sovereign coercion. No armed intervention once blood touches stone." Murmurs rose, rough and urgent. Owen snapped, "This is theater." "This is law," Astrid said. "The one you keep quoting." Rurik was already moving, ordering guards to the perimeter lane and neutral wardens to the outer markers. The dead assassin's blade was sealed into an evidence bowl. The forged seals bundle sat in full view on the clerk table. Astrid caught the faint resin sting again from the letters at her belt, same bitter note as the paste on the silver spike. Her pulse steadied around that detail. Proof had a scent tonight. Victor took one step toward her, unsteady but deliberate. "You can still withdraw, and let me hold the line." She met his gaze. Amber had dulled at the edges with pain, but command remained. "If you hold it, he calls it King's force. If I hold it, he answers the law he weaponized." Their eyes locked for one hard second, then he nodded and stepped back. "Then I witness," he said. She took the oath knife from the herald's trembling hand and walked to the first standing stone. The broken cuff and short chain she had demanded returned as evidence after the ravine hung from her belt. She drew it free and looped it around her left wrist, iron cold against pulse. Then she cut her right palm in one clean line and pressed blood to the stone. Wind rose. Not weather. Something older, moving along the carved channels beneath the dais and up through the ring, lifting ash from braziers in thin spirals. Torches bent inward as if listening. Wolves at the court edge went rigid, ears pinned, noses high. Astrid moved to the second stone, then the third, blooding each marker while the court watched. By the fourth, her hand shook from blood loss and strain, but she did not stop. When she reached the final stone, she raised her bleeding palm. "By boundary law and living breath, let oath scent separate truth from ash." The wind answered in a hard circular gust that spun through the center lane and over the evidence table. Waxed smoke changed color as it passed the western seal bundle, turning from clean white to sooty gray. One seal cracked with a dry pop and dropped from its ribbon, half melted where no flame touched it. A western elder blanched. "That registry mark is deadline," he whispered, too loud for privacy. "It belonged to Elder Malin." Rurik stepped forward, voice ringing. "Recorded. Dead Elder Seal presented as living witness." Owen recovered quickly, lifting his hands with wounded outrage. "A trick of Eastern rightcraft. You poison the air, then blame parchment." Astrid pulled her mother's letter free and held it up. "Then test this too." She handed it to the herald. Break the seal. The herald obeyed. As wax split, the same resin-heavy odor bled into the night. 3 Western women in the witness row exchanged sharp looks. One stood. "That is Regent resin," she said. "Council stores use it, not household wax." Another added, "Silvermane private office blend." Owen's jaw hardened. "Sit down." They did not. Minutes stretched thin as wire. The wind circled again, snapping Owen's cloak hem against his boots. Victor swayed once. Hadron moved as if to support him and stopped when Victor bared his teeth in warning. He remained upright by discipline alone. Astrid stepped into the vow circle's center and faced Owen across the blood channels. "You forged living seals. You carried coerced letters. You brought an assassin and called it remedy. I renounce Silvermane claim before both packs. I choose Dark Hollow lands by my own voice." Gasps broke from the Western benches. Choice mattered more than insult. With that sentence, she had cut his central argument at the root. Owen's face stripped down to contempt. "You choose because he scented your weakness and wrapped it in protection. You were always coin with a pulse, Astrid. I only spent you where it fed our future." She lifted the broken chain. "Then answer your currency in single combat under right law." The herald stared at her. "Claimant challenge against blood claimant accepted only if both parties consent before closure." "I consent," Astrid said. All eyes turned to Owen. Refusal would brand cowardice and concede fraud in front of 2 packs and neutral wardens. He smiled, thin and lethal. "Gladly." The herald struck the stone with the oath staff. Circle closes. It happened in the breath between those words and the second strike. Owen moved early, breaking form exactly as Astrid expected he would. A silvered blade slid from his sleeve and flashed toward her chest before the vow ring fully sealed. She pivoted left, pain ripping up her ankle, and the blade skimmed cloth instead of heart. Metal sang. He drove in again, faster than ceremony fighters were supposed to be, all training gone feral under panic. Astrid snapped the chain from her wrist and whipped it across his knife hand. Iron wrapped his wrist once, twice. She yanked with all her weight. Owen stumbled forward onto one knee at the stone's edge, breath exploding from him. The silver blade clattered away across the channel groove. He twisted, trying to wrench free, and she drove the cuff ring down over his knuckles like a shackle reborn. Crowd noise surged, then broke into chants, Eastern and Western voices both. "Oath! Oath! Oath!" He spat at her boots. "You think this makes you sovereign? You are still a traded girl in borrowed fur." Astrid reached to the evidence stand, seized the treaty brand they had brought for registry verification, and pressed the cold iron into the carved blood groove between them where his forged seals had been displayed. "Then watch your currency choose its own kingdom." Wind slammed down through the circle. Ash lifted in a tight spiral around Owen's knees. On the clerk table, the forged seal ribbons blackened and caught, not in bright flame but in searing silver light that raced along the wax impressions and consumed only the false marks. Genuine witness ties remained untouched. The herald's voice cracked from strain and awe. "Forgery proven under boundary wind. Coercive claim void. Oathbreaker named." Owen snarled and surged up with his free hand clawing for her throat. Astrid stepped inside his reach, trapped that arm against her body, and drove her shoulder into his sternum. He lost balance on the blood-slick channel lip. She stripped his wrist from the chain, kicked the back of his knee, and sent him sprawling beyond the inner ring to the neutral lane. By right, once cast beyond the boundary by the challenger, he had no pack protection. Neutral wardens were already there. 2 pinned his arms, a third snapped iron around his wrists. He thrashed, shouting toward the western benches. "I am your regent by right. Stand me up. Stand me up now." No one moved. His gaze found Astrid one final time, hate and disbelief warring in it. You doomed your mother with this, Astrid's voice held, though the words cut on the way out. No, you did when you wrote her fear as law. Rurik handed the sealed poison blade to the chief warden. Evidence logged. Assassin linked by possession and entry record to Silvermane delegation. Oathbreaker remanded under pack code. The chief warden nodded. Sentence hearing at dawn under neutral tribunal, capital penalty eligible. Take him, Astrid said. Owen twisted against the wardens as they dragged him down the marker lane. His last shouted threats dissolved under the crowd's verdict. First a rumble, then a unified call that shook frost from the standing stones. Oathbreaker, Oathbreaker. 3 days from now, people would still be arguing over every legal nuance of this night, but in that moment the core truth was clean. He had come to reclaim property and had left in chains. Astrid stood in the center of the ring with blood drying on her palm and iron biting her wrist. The wind eased. Torches straightened. Somewhere in the outer rows, a Western elder dropped to one knee, then another. Not in fealty to a throne, but in recognition of a lawful judgment none of them could erase. Only then did she turn to Victor. He was still on his feet, though color had drained from his face, and blue shadow crept from the cut at his side toward his ribs. Relief hit her so hard it bordered on pain. She crossed the circle in 3 strides, caught his forearm, and felt his weight shift, just slightly, into her hold. "Stay with me," she said. His mouth curved, grim and proud at once. "You rewrote the map," he murmured. Behind them, clerks were already recording the ruling, line by line, seal by seal, while both packs watched the old law become new ground beneath their feet. Victor's knees buckled. Astrid caught him with both hands and shouted for the healer before he hit stone. Rurik and Hadrian were there in 2 breaths, taking Victor's weight without taking control from her, letting her keep one arm around him as they moved him through the torchlit lane toward the inner fortress. The cut at his side kept leaking through his fingers, dark at first and then edged with that same faint blue shadow she had seen on the assassin's blade. In the corridor outside the infirmary, she handed Rurik the letters and the broken chain, then the treaty brand wrapped in cloth, and watched him seal each item into separate evidence boxes with wax and witness signatures. "Poison blade to neutral wardens," she said. "Already logged," Rurik answered. Chief Warden signed the transfer in front of both delegations. "The forged seals." "Bagged, ash included. Herald certified the burn pattern." "The courier copy?" "Returned and acknowledged, as you heard this morning. I will add tonight's ruling and send duplicates to both marker towers before dawn." Nothing lost. Nothing left for rumor to erase. Inside, the healer cut away Victor's tunic and worked with ruthless speed, flushing the wound, scraping the blue residue, binding herbs that smelled of pine resin and bitter root. Astrid stood at his shoulder until the shaking in her hands made the bowl rattle, then stepped back only when Victor caught her wrist and gave one short nod. "Stay. Breathe." He lived through the worst hour. By the time the moon tipped west, the healer declared the poison stalled and ordered strict rest. Dawn came hard and pale over black stone. Neutral wardens returned under white flag and read their finding in the Great Hall. Owen Silvermane was convicted as oathbreaker, conspiracy principal in attempted sovereign murder, and forger under boundary code. Sentence was death under neutral law, carried out at first light beyond the western marker where no pack could claim retaliation. Pell, named by 2 escorts and a records clerk as participant in unlawful restraint and assault during transfer, was stripped of rank and sentenced to labor levy under Western Tribunal supervision. The gray-mantled assassin died unnamed. His entry token had been issued through a Silvermane office ledger the Western women identified by hand. The women who had stood in the witness rows came forward one by one, palms to stone, and repeated what they knew. Regent resin used on letters, dead elder seal copied from archive, council minutes altered after the vote. None recanted. Astrid listened without triumph. Truth, once spoken, still cost. Her mother's letter lay on the adjudicator table beside a sample from the Silvermane stores. The scent matched. Forged pressure. Coerced language. The court recorder noted that the hand was genuine, but the circumstances were duress. Astrid requested the letter be archived, not burned. Let it stand, she said. Fear leaves a record too. When the hall emptied, she asked for one more report. Her mother had been moved from the Regent household to her sister's valley under witness protection status. Alive. Unpunished. Her uncle and aunts signed formal censure and lost council vote for 7 years. They sent no message. The silence, at last, belonged to them. By the second night after judgment, snow had begun to gather in thin silver seams along the upper terraces. Victor was strong enough to walk, slower than usual, bandage hidden under a dark tunic. He asked no ceremony, gave no command. He simply waited at the entrance to the Moon Tribunal ring where they had first collided and where she had rewritten the law. No guards inside the stones, no audience. Only Rurik at a distance, recording witness time and then withdrawing beyond earshot. Astrid stepped into the circle with her hair unbound and the old cuff in her hand. She set the iron at the base of the first standing stone and touched it once, farewell without tenderness. Victor watched, eyes steady. The old predatory light banked into something deeper and quieter. If you say no, he said, voice low in the wind, we leave this ring unmarked, and nothing changes about your status, your authority, or your safety. I will not trade one cage for another and call it devotion. The knot behind her ribs loosened so sharply it hurt. She crossed the space between them until his breath touched her temple. I am not saying yes to be protected, she said. I am saying yes because I choose you where no one can force me. His hand rose, stopped short of her skin, waiting. She tilted her head and bared the line where neck met shoulder. Consent, clear as moonlight. Mark me, Victor. He made a sound that was almost a prayer and almost a growl, then drew her into his arms with exquisite care, as if she were both breakable and unbreakable. His mouth touched her skin first in reverence, not hunger. Warm breath. A pause. Then his teeth sank at the bond point with controlled force. Pain flashed white and immediate. Astrid's fingers locked in his shirt. The bite burned, then deepened, then changed. Heat poured through the wound in a liquid rush that carried not injury but recognition, as though a locked door inside her chest had been struck from both sides at once. The ache became a pulsing thrum that spread along her throat, down her spine, into her palms. She heard his heartbeat through his ribs, felt it stagger, then align with hers in a driving twin rhythm. Mine came through the bond, not as possession, but as vow. She exhaled against his shoulder, trembling, and answered aloud, yours. He withdrew just enough to look at her, amber brightening in his eyes. A thin line of blood marked her skin, and then sealed with a faint gold-silver flare that moved under the surface like ink taking to parchment. She cupped his jaw, pulled him down, and found the pulse at the base of his shoulder where muscle met neck. Your turn, she whispered. Mine. Her bite landed less perfectly than his, sharper with urgency, but Victor did not move away. He braced, then shuddered as the mark took. Heat surged back through her in the opposite direction, his strength and restraint and old loneliness pouring across the new bond channel in one fierce flood. She felt fragments that were not memory exactly, but emotional truth. Years of command without refuge, every decision measured in casualties. The moment on the ravine shelf when he saw her in chains and chose law over appetite. The long vigil outside her door while she fought nightmares he could not enter. Mate, the bond said, now unmistakable. She pressed her forehead to his. He wrapped both arms around her and held on as the connection settled, wave after wave smoothing into a steady current neither of them had to force. The world sharpened and softened at once. Stone smelled cleaner, snow brighter. His presence no longer a threat she had to map, but a constant she could lean into without disappearing. "No treaty owns you," he murmured against her brow, voice unsteady for the first time she had ever heard. "No throne stands without us," she answered. They stayed like that until the moon dropped behind the east ridge and the bond quieted into a living hum beneath skin. When they finally stepped out of the ring, Rurik returned, took one look at their marks, and went to one knee with his fist to his chest. "My king, my Luna." His mouth twitched. "About time." Victor actually laughed, rough and brief. Astrid felt the sound through their link before she heard it. At the next full moon, the fortress court filled again, not for accusation, but for witness. The rewritten map was carved onto a slate panel at the center dais, boundary lines adjusted under right authority, mountain passes held in shared transit trust, and a new first clause in both legal scripts stating that no person could be traded, pledged, or transferred as treaty collateral under any circumstance. Heralds from both packs read it aloud. Western delegates signed. Eastern delegates signed. Neutral wardens sealed copies and carried them to every marker tower before sunrise. Bren, healed and sober-eyed, knelt first among the guard and renewed his oath to Astrid without prompting. Hadrian, Tovik, Eslin, and Mar followed, each by name. Rurik placed the old broken cuff in a glass case beside the tribunal archive and logged it as retired evidence, then handed Astrid the key to that case. "Your history," he said, "under your lock." When she and Victor stood before the court stones, no one called her claimant anymore. They called her High Luna of the Eastern Crown and Treaty Keeper of the Boundaries. The title sat heavy and right. She accepted it with Victor at her side, not ahead of her. Their joined marks glowed once in the moonlight when they clasped forearms, and the crowd answered with a thunder of fists to chests and wolves, howling from the parapets above. Later, when the ceremony fires burned low, Astrid walked to the new boundary stones with Victor and watched dawn spill gold over the passes Owen had tried to seize. On the western ridge, a small escort waited under truce pennant to deliver grain ledgers and winter road schedules under the new clause. Work, not war. She breathed cedar, snow, and clean ink drying on lawful pages. The map beneath her boots was no longer a cage drawn by other hands. It was chosen ground, witnessed and named, and when Victor's fingers laced with hers, she did not brace for loss. She leaned closer, felt the bond answer warm and certain, and faced the morning as queen, mate, and woman unowned.